the next month or two? I don't know, but let's talk about it. Okay, so if you watch a lot of my videos, you know that my advice is the same all the time, which is buy as much Bitcoin as you can and sit on it for as long as conceivably possible. And please buy yourself a Bitkey, BITKEY .world, WORLD, Bitcoin, sorry, Bitkey, Bitkey.world. Please buy it so you don't get hacked and scammed out of your Bitcoin. But let's talk about the ups and downs of Bitcoin. So the price peaked at $124,000 like 2 weeks ago and is that currently down at $108,000. So that's, I don't know what percent down that is. I don't know, 15% or whatever that is. And of course, on Twitter, weeping and gnashing of teeth. Oh no, the end is near. People are down on their Bitcoin, blah, blah, blah. Well, most of that weeping and gnashing of teeth is not people who own Bitcoin. They're complaining about the price of Bitcoin, but what they actually own is a bunch of stupid coins that are down like 80%, and they're upset about it, but they don't want to complain about the stupid coins they're down 80% on because they're embarrassed that they bought stupid coins. And so they're complaining about the price of Bitcoin as sort of a proxy for the fact that they're down. Well, again, people who are down 15% are not typically wailing and gnashing teeth. But a bunch of people, again, bought stuff they shouldn't have bought that I told them not to buy. Now, the people I'm talking to are not doing that, but a bunch of people on Twitter, they bought Bitcoin treasury companies, not Bitcoin, but Bitcoin treasury companies, which you shouldn't. They bought Bitcoin miners, which you shouldn't. They bought crypto tokens other than Bitcoin, which you shouldn't. And, those things, a lot of that's down 70%, 80%, some ridiculous amount. And of course, there's weeping and gnashing of teeth, but because people are embarrassed to say that they bought the stupid stuff because they knew it was stupid stuff, but they thought they could pawn it off on somebody dumber, which is the greater fool theory. They thought they could find a greater fool to dump it on. So they don't want to admit that they own stupid stuff and that they were the greater fool. And so they're complaining about the price of Bitcoin instead, even though that's not actually what they're upset about. So there's a lot of that going on. But the price of Bitcoin is down from 124,000. So the first thing I would say about the price of Bitcoin is it just doesn't matter in the long term. So here's an analogy. Let's assume you have a kid comes home from kindergarten and they're just heartbroken because they have, a kindergarten crush on somebody in their grade and that person doesn't like them back, right? I mean, these things happen. And what you want to tell your kid is it just doesn't matter, right? I mean, the number of people that marry a kindergarten crush is basically zero. You're just, whether the person you have a crush on in kindergarten likes you back just doesn't matter in the long term. But of course, in the moment, that kid feels like it's all they can see in the world. Their entire radar is filled with this one thing, which is the person they have a crush on doesn't like them back. The world is over. Everything is so sad. The end is near. Blah blah blah. Well, that's what I feel like right now with the price of Bitcoin, which is, hey, it just doesn't matter right now in the long term whether. Hold on 1 second here. Let me make sure the audio is working. I hope the audio was working for that last video. I had a charger plugged in, but hopefully it did not hijack the audio. Um, so hopefully people understand that, like, look, this stuff just doesn't matter in the long term. It just doesn't matter at all. And who cares if Bitcoin is down 15% in 2025? Guess what? At every single price point throughout Bitcoin's entire history, it's been down 15% 1,000 times. In fact, I think somebody ran the math when Bitcoin was down like 10%, and they were like, hey, Bitcoin's been down 10%, a total of 1,663 times. It's like some ridiculously high number that Bitcoin had been down that percent in its lifetime. So this just doesn't matter. And let me illustrate one more way, which I've done in other videos, but I'll do it here, which is back when I was buying Bitcoin in 2017 and 2018, a lot of the prices were about 10% of today's current prices. So $108,000 is the equivalent of 10,800. $124,000 is the equivalent of $12,400. Just all you do is you just knock a zero off the numbers. And it was the same thing back then that it is now. The price drops from 12,000 down to 10,800 and oh no, it's the end of the world. Everybody's losing money. Everybody's all sad that they bought Bitcoin at different prices and, all that sort of stuff. And again, it just doesn't matter. In the long term, what matters is how much Bitcoin did you buy? I wish I had bought way more Bitcoin at $12,000. And it didn't matter if I bought it at $8,000, which is the equivalent of 80,000 today, or $12,000, which is the equivalent of $120,000 today. I just wish I had bought way more Bitcoin in 2017 and 2018 at any price between $8,000 and $12,000. Even if I had to go back and every single Bitcoin I bought to the present, I had to pay the highest price I bought back then, which was like $12,000. I would buy it all. Like I'd spend all my money on Bitcoin back then at $12,000, which was the highest price in the whole range that it was trading. But it was still been better off than what I actually did, which was I bought some back then, but I bought a lot more at higher prices later. So it just doesn't matter because in the long term, the price will be much higher than it is today. So it just doesn't matter what the price is right now. Um, one other thing on that front is the same thing happened last year. Literally 12 months ago, the price ran up to 73,074. It was technically 73,800. So let's call it 74,000. And then the price traded sideways for 8 months, 8 solid months, which means there's a ton of people that bought Bitcoin at $68,000, $72,000, $64,000. And the lowest it ever got was about $50,000 for like a day or like a series of hours. It was like a few hours was below 50,000 or maybe a few minutes. I don't know. It was like no time at all. Same thing. Everybody who bought it at 68 was all bummed out because Bitcoin was down in the 50s and then it was in the 60s. And, they had bought it at 68, but it was trading at 62. And again, all those people think, hey, it sure would have been nice to buy more Bitcoin at 68. The same is true. Eventually, if you bought Bitcoin at $124,000, which it was only at for like 2 seconds. So let's assume, a lot more people bought Bitcoin around, let's say 118. I think the highest I paid for Bitcoin was one of my paychecks hit when Bitcoin was like 122,000. So I bought Bitcoin myself close to within a percentage point or two of the highest it's ever been because that's when my paycheck hit. And I don't ever care what the price is. I just buy Bitcoin with my entire paycheck no matter what. But anyway, uh, so again, but in retrospect, a bunch of people right now wish they could buy $68,000 Bitcoin. But at the time, they were all lamenting the $68,000 Bitcoin because it was at 62,000 and they felt like it was down. Same thing's going to happen here. So that being said, knowing all that, what do you do if you do care about the price of Bitcoin? You're freaking out about the price of Bitcoin. Okay, the number one thing you can do is subscribe to James Check, who goes by Checkmate or Checkmatey with a Y. He has a Substack and a newsletter, and it costs $29 a month, 29, so $29 a month, about $1 a day, slightly less than $1 a day, and it's fantastic. And he keeps you constantly appraised of what is exactly causing the price of Bitcoin to go up and down based on supply and demand. He cannot predict exactly what's going to happen with the price of Bitcoin, but he can give you probabilities of the likelihood that the price goes down to 80,000 versus up to 140, 160,000. And even though he'll tell you he can't tell which direction it's going to go, he can give you a lot of insight into why the price is behaving the way it is. So, for example, when the price drops from 124,000 to 108,000, instead of freaking out, you can know that, hey, it's because demand for the exchange traded funds is a little bit soft. The Bitcoin treasury companies have not been able to raise as much money as they were hoping. Therefore, their demand is softer. And, you still have too many OGs with Bitcoin that have decided that, at a price above 100,000 is a good enough price as any to liquidate some Bitcoin to improve the lives of them and their families somehow, which is the exact same thing that happened when Bitcoin went above $10,000. There was a ton of people that thought Bitcoin would never get above $10,000. And when it finally did, they were like, wow, $10,000 of Bitcoin? It just took a long time to overcome the selling pressure of a bunch of people that had waited many years for Bitcoin. Not many. I mean, I guess it went above 10,000 in 2017. Bitcoin started in 2009. So some of those very early people had waited 6, 7, or 8 years for Bitcoin to cross 10,000. And when it finally did, they decided to improve the lives of them and their families, and that involved selling some Bitcoin. And good for them. It's the reason I could buy Bitcoin at 10,000 because someone somewhere was selling Bitcoin for 10,000. But anyway, if you want to feel better about all of it, subscribe to James Check's newsletter. It comes out twice a week. It gives you a huge amount of insight into why things are happening. You can ignore all the charts and graphs and acronyms. You don't need to know any of that stuff. You can just listen for the flavor, the tone of his voice, how he talks, whether he sounds pessimistic, whether he sounds optimistic. And I've done 2 separate videos on Facebook specifically about how to read his reports, what to look for, what you can ignore, all that sort of stuff. So uh, if you want to feel better about the price of Bitcoin, subscribe to James Check. Even if you subscribe for a month and you can decide if you like it or not. So that's my recommendation. Hope all that makes sense. And same advice as always, buy as much Bitcoin as you can and hold on to it for as long as conceivably possible. Thanks.